Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, it gives me tremendous pleasure to introduce to you one of the forefathers of the Westmount SDA Adventist Church, responsible for enormous ministry in the Montreal area back in the 1970s and into the 1990s, serving as a president of the Quebec SDA Adventist Conference. He is a man, he is an author, he is an evangelist, he is a father of four incredible children, and he is a highly respected man of God and a PhD doctorate from McGill University. I introduce to you the man responsible for my baptism in 1978, Dr. Robert O.A. Sams. On this particular subject, those watching this feature over the next several weeks should know that back in 1978, approximately 45 years ago, you baptized my mom and I after giving us Bible lessons at our home in Park Extension. That was during the era when pastors would do home visits and get acquainted with their members. Do you have memories of conducting a crusade back in 1978 and baptizing many members? That's what it was called back then, and ultimately dipping us in the pool of redemption.
Well, let me put it this way. I clearly remember your mom.
Yes.
And I remember you when you came in the church. No question about it. I don't remember the exact baptismal occasion.
Okay.
I certainly remember forming a bond with you and your mom. And
Yes.
when you came in the church, I clearly remember that. Your mom was a lovely person. We had a great relationship.
Yes, as you did with all the members back then. But let's begin with those formative years back in Jamaica. Were you a city boy, or did you grow up in the country, and was church, education, and family a big part of your upbringing?
A good question. People have asked me that from time to time, where I was born, where I was brought up. Is complicated. Born in Kingston.
Yes.
Grew up in Roehampton, St. James.
Okay.
And then later at age, I think at about age 10, moved to Falmouth, Trelawney. And then at 15, went to Nakalba in Hanover and spent 3 years in a boarding school there. And then at 18, when I graduated, I went back to Kingston. And that's when, in fact, to Spanish Town first with my father. And that's when I met someone that generated the interest to become Seventh-day Adventist.
I see. Well, let's talk about your arrival at the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's quite an assignment back then that literally changed what I can view as the trajectory of the English-speaking Seventh-day Adventist Church in Montreal. By the time you were done serving Westmount, it was by far the largest predominantly Black church in the Anglophone community. The church was experiencing such an overflow that the conference saw the wisdom in opening up other churches in Ville St. Pierre and in Point St. Charles. So tell us about the growth of Westmount. What was the reason for the church's popularity among Caribbeans migrating to Montreal?
I think that's quite an insightful question, Harold. And Christopher, I should say. Yes, what happened was I arrived there in July of 1973.
Okay.
And I just come in from Jamaica, just being ordained the year before, and served for a year in Ontario Conference. Then when an opening came there in Montreal, they invited me to be pastor of that church, which was in turmoil at the time. You were maybe too young or maybe not in the church yet to understand, but I'm sure you got a little feel of that from others who were members at the time.
Okay.
So I came in, and my task was to settle a church that was in turmoil, conflict between the conference and the members themselves. And unless you ask me a question on that, I'm going to leave that alone. So, okay, so the next thing was, well, maybe I should just mention to you that at that time there was a Westmount Church, which had about 150 attendees.
Okay.
And then just before that, they had an evangelistic series by Elder Vanderman, and he started with about 30 members out of Westmount, and what he had baptized started in Norwood Church. So
Okay.
there were really only two. This was Westmount, and then a baby church just starting.
Yes.
On the east side was only the Haitian church, which
Yes.
had then taken over St. Leonard Church.
Yes.
So there were only 3 churches in Montreal and a total of 7 churches in the whole region of Quebec. So my task was multifaceted. I had to not only settle the church, which was in turmoil, but also renew the church. In fact, Christopher, the first Sabbath I preached in Westmount
Yes.
was the last I heard of the PA system. And at about the same time, the heating system broke down and its roof was leaking. So it was a kind of an introduction that was a challenge. And I set about immediately to do the first thing, which was to renovate the church, get it in a position where it would be an inviting place to be. And then I launched evangelistic meetings immediately. And the church that first year, we baptized 120.
Wow.
So that's how that started. So the church immediately increased to about 300 members. So from that, when we found that it was expanding, we decided in 1975 board meeting to start 2 new churches. That was a decision of the Westmount Church, not the conference.
Okay.
In fact, some members opposed it and went to the conference to stop it. But I pushed ahead anyway and had an evangelistic series in La Salle, and I invited Pastor Lowe at the time in the union to come in and do an evangelistic series in the Pointe St. Charles region.
Yes.
And both churches were started at the same time in 1976 spring, and we organized them soon thereafter.
That's a fascinating journey. But particularly with Westmount, where it was situated at the top of the hill in Westmount, in a very lucrative neighborhood, all of these Caribbeans gathered. Did you always have a sense that it would work and that the community would embrace the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Westmount?
There was always an issue, social issue. Westmount being established, as you rightly said, in a very prominent area of Montreal, very, very higher than middle class. It would be like upper middle or lower upper. And so it was a very sensitive area to be in when Blacks were just coming in. Maybe I should just go back a bit and let you know. Maybe you know by now anyway, by your studies, I know you're quite knowledgeable, that Trudeau had just been elected in the late 1960s, I think it was 67, and that when he did, he opened the door for immigrants to come in. Because
Chair Elliott Trudeau, the father.
Yes, Elliott Trudeau, the father Trudeau. Yes, thank you very much. And when he did that, he intended to bring Europeans in. But there was no way to have done that because at that time, the immigration policy did not include immigrants from any third world country. We call it third world country today. Yeah. And even second world for that matter, it was seeking Europeans to come in. But when the West Indians heard that, especially the fact that England had just closed its door to more West Indians coming in, they all started to flood in from Africa, from Asia, from the West Indies. And so I had the opportunity now to settle the West Indians that were coming in. That's how that was. But Westmount at that time had about a third Filipino. They had what at the time Hungarians, Yugoslavians. They had the various cultures, English-speaking cultures, white and so on, were in Westmount. So the Blacks coming in were very obvious.
Yes.
And so the people around were constantly complaining and reporting it to the police
Wow.
that we were making disturbance in the neighborhood. I had to kind of calm and settle that. And then we started with some concerts and invite the neighborhood in and quiet them, let them know we were doing something. And then when we renovated the church, the whole mood changed. They saw that we were in there to improve the area, not to do something to harm it.
That's a remarkable story. Now, not only were you the senior pastor of the Westmount SDA Church in Westmount, but you had a young, beautiful family that everyone admired and loved. How hard was it to be a father of 4 young children while growing this dynamic church?
It was a challenge, but nevertheless, I enjoyed it because we had a wife at the time that was second to none.
Yes,
In fact, I was always in conflict with some of the activistic members,
yes,
and my wife was always a calming influence on the whole situation. And she, of course, embraced taking care of the children, making sure they were um, kind of taken care of while
yes.
I was up and around. In fact, the first year, I never forgot, I drove over 30,000 miles that first year because I was the only Black English speaking pastor in the entire city. At the time, that city was larger than Toronto.
Okay.
So I was all over the place. And I believed in visiting, so I was always up and around. But my wife, Pamela, took care of the children, and I think we came out okay.
Yes, you did. You definitely did. Now, you've always put a premium on education, even
Absolutely.
even graduating with a doctorate degree from McGill University. Where did you find the time to study, raise a family, and serve the Seventh-day Adventist Church across Quebec in the role of president of the conference? How did you manage to juggle so many responsibilities?
Well, I have to think back on that one. I don't know how I did it. But to tell you the truth, I never rested. I was constantly in motion, put it that way. But let me go back a little bit, though, and give you a little bit of insight into something you never asked.
Okay.
The education at the time was, for me, important for the church members. And so what I did was to focus on church school. And I did that in a way that the church school grew and grew. At the time, we just had Sylvia Greaves as one teacher in a church school in the Norwood building, but then the Norwood church building. But then I realized that they needed more room, more space. So I negotiated with the Catholic um, school board, and I got a building. And that building was the seat of not only elementary now, but we moved it up to high school. The attorney Dewberry coming in as principal of that and leaving Sylvia Greaves as elementary. So my thought was always to build up education. One more thing I'd say before I move on that is that I came up with the idea with my church board to make the education free. So
Wow.
for a while in Montreal, Christian education was free. And that's another question. I could tell you how we did it, but we did it, and there was no lack at all. When you have faith and move forward. So for me then, let me answer that. I had no interest particularly to go into higher studies. I was just enjoying my ministry, doing what I could do. In fact, my sermons were developed within a 2-hour span. Didn't have
Okay.
any more time than that. I could, no matter how I'm running series of meetings or when I'm preaching on Sabbaths, towards the most I could spend to develop my sermon. So time was not my friend.
Yes.
Nevertheless, the Lord just impressed me that you should take advantage. McGill University is just over the hill.
Yes.
Let's see what we could do. So I made an application, and interestingly, they accepted me on an advanced standing from a doctorate. And possibly by my grades or just the Lord's blessing, I don't know what that's how it was. So I was able to complete the residency very quickly, but I took time with the research, and didn't happen right away. I took time before
Yes.
I got that completed.
I want to just briefly return to the Greaves Academy. For a lot of people in Montreal and beyond Montreal aren't aware that there was literally a private school, for an elementary private school that was overseen by the denomination known as the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and that it was run here in Montreal. And I guess it was really a novel idea, because I don't know too many other churches besides the Catholic Church that actually spearheaded education and allowed students to come and get their education. Did you have any pushback from the provincial government to have this authenticated?
Not really. Surprisingly enough, well, maybe I should step back a little bit and give you a little bit of background there. You see, what had happened is that the Parliament of Quebec had been the one to approve the bylaws of the Seventh-day Adventist Association at the time. It wasn't a conference.
Okay.
So because they approved that, we had that as the basis for which we could move forward. And they always cooperated with us with our educational plan, providing the teachers were qualified, and we always saw to that. So that is what I would say God sent. And of course, remember now I told you about the building?
Yes.
That building came from the government. And interestingly enough, I don't want to take tales out of school too much, but I was pastor, chairman of the board, all of that. And when I got the school set up, I got an agreement with the Catholic School Board that in 1 year,
Yes.
they would sell me the school for $1.
Wow.
That school is on Prudhomme. And so I left that year, the very year, 1981.
Okay.
That following year, they could have gone in and got the school for $1. And whoever came in after me missed it.
Yes.
And not only didn't they get the school for $1, they lost the school itself and had to leave and find other quarters.
Wow.
Because somebody else came in and took it.
You know what? Westmount has so many wonderful memories and experiences for so many of us. Two of my most memorable experiences as it relates to the Westmount Church is my baptism that you oversaw for my mother and I, and my very first gospel concert. I've done concerts for too many years, but my very first one was really at the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church as an AY leader, an Adventist youth leader, back in 1987, which kind of gave me an inspiration to explore that again and again. Do you have any unforgettable experiences or memories of individuals or special events that you've always remembered to this very day when it comes to the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church?
So what question are you asking?
Is there a specific memory of an event, a person, or an experience tied to Westmount Church?
I just want to remind you, you may know but may not remember that I served 2 terms there in Quebec.
Oh yes, I do.
We go together.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first one I left in 1981 as a pastor, and others, of course, succeeded me there. But I went to Alberta, went to the United States, and ended up in Greater New York Conference in New York.
Okay.
While I was there, the church invited me back to be president.
Yes.
And that happened in July of 1988.
88.
Now, the interesting thing about that was when I decided to visit in May, when they were having their constituency meeting, I was not yet installed, but I was allowed to come in and sit as a guest,
Yes.
or as an observer. However, as I noticed what was happening, they were dividing the church into, or the conference at that time, into Montreal and the rest of Quebec.
Okay.
That was called the Acadian Quebecois Project. $300,000 at the time had been advanced to develop that program. And the sitting president of Quebec Claude Sabot would be president of that, and I was called in to be president of the Montreal Island,
I
which
see.
Westmount and the other churches, Filipino, Spanish, and so on churches were.
Yeah.
In other words, we were being divided.
Mm.
And I said no. So when I was invited to that meeting and I saw the dynamics, and it was very, very
Clear.
live in the debates and so forth going on, I asked the president, Jim Wilson at the time, would you allow me to speak? And he said, sure, you are the president coming in. And I got up and I said, fellow believers, I am going to point you to the bylaws of the Quebec, at that time an association, because I'm the one who led it into a conference. And I said, that was later, of course. And I said, the bylaws said that the territory of Quebec is the territory of the association.
Yes.
You're not divided unless you go back to the parliament and ask them permission. Pandemonium broke out. And as you know, the rest of the story, we stayed together and I became president of the whole conference, and
Yes.
Sabot then was under me.
That is an interesting story, which almost lends itself to a second question. In our quest to grow closer to God, we must also wrestle with the world realities, which is sometimes economical, sometimes it's cultural. How do you get people of all kindred, of all tongues, of all languages, and of all cultures to come under one roof and worship the same God?
Tremendous question. That's the heart of what we believe, isn't it? Because that's the hope of the Christian Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 to 12, our marching orders. And in it says every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. Now, if we don't believe that, then we can't live it. So when I came into Westmount at first in July 1973, when I came in, I was obviously from Jamaica. And people realized that, of course. And there were two pastors before me that were Jamaicans. And they were fed up now of Jamaicans. So, so that was another issue. I was coming in on the track of two pastors previous to me, Pastor Parchment, Pastor Green.
Yes.
And he did not leave with great favor when he left. So they didn't want any more Jamaican. So when I didn't know any of that, of course, but when I came in, I decided not to talk about Jamaica, not to talk about Trinidad, not to talk about Barbados. I don't want to. And I told them in my first presentation to them, I don't want to know where they came from.
Right.
And I'm not going to tell them where I come from. If they want to find out, they may. I am not against it, but I'm not going to promote it. So as long as I was there in the Westmount Church, I never elevated where people are from. You know, Barbados and Trinidad and so on. And even my elders, you know, Christopher, interestingly enough, I didn't find out till many years later that I hardly had any Jamaican on my elder staff. I thought I didn't know where they were from. I didn't want to know. But Pierce was the first elder at the time under me. And of course, he's not from Jamaica, and I could name you many others. So I followed later. So my idea was to bring everybody together without thought about race, or without thought about where you're from, or without thought about your status, and we got along great.
I'm going to conclude our interview with one final question, which is the fact that you've done it all. You've served as a senior pastor, a president of a conference, you're an author, a family man. Are there any burning issues still on your plate, on your to-do list that you want to accomplish?
Well, I would like to answer that, but I can't because it would take a while.
Okay.
I will just maybe mention it by topic, not by issue.
Yes.
The church is no longer what I came in to find. I came into this church in 1957. and at the age of 18, so you can know my age.
Okay.
And when I came in, the church I found then is definitely not the church today. So my burden would be, what if we, and I know we have to change.
Yes.
Everything changes anyway, whether we like it or not. But are we changing for the better is my issue. Are we doing better? Is this generation better than the one before? Are my children's generation exceeding mine? And I don't find that to be the case. So I think we are in danger of issues now that we are accepting that we should not be, and we are placed in a jeopardy of losing our salvation. That's my burden. And it's a serious burden. Takes a whole nother dynamic and time for us to pull that apart and see what is behind it. But that's my burden. And I love the Westmount Church. I mean, it's the heart of my ministry, really. And being president was not as significant as being pastor of the Westmount Church. In fact, I am the one who changed the name from Stanley Seventh-day Adventist Church to the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Oh, that's good to know.
I am the one who gave it the name. When we renovated it and we dedicated it, it was dedicated 1 year after I arrived in the fall of 1974.
Yes.
And at that time, we changed the name to the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Excellent.
So, yes, I have great fond memories of the Westmount Church. In fact, I wrote a chapter of a history there. They were setting up a book at the time.
Yes.
I don't know what happened to the book, but I did write a chapter telling more details about my service there.
Wonderful. Well,
Could
Dr.
you allow me one more point?
Yes, of course. Of course.
I mentioned earlier in this interview that I had a wife that really was the foundation of my ministry in the Westmount Church. She just got along beautifully with everybody, and they loved her. And I think she kind of was a buffer between me and them. And of course, not the members all, but there are some radical ones. And so she passed away.
Yeah.
And when she did, I felt like maybe I still had a little bit left in me to do ministry, because we had started a ministry which is family ministry.
Yes.
And that's what I transitioned into. And I now was left without a partner. So I came back to Westmount to find a partner. And that one is Petulia Clark, as you know, and we are getting along great in carrying on that ministry the best we can by God's grace.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, Dr. Sams, and I'm glad we got reacquainted. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christopher, for the invitation. It was a pleasure talking to you as well. And I remember your mom, remember that. And I expect the best of you. Hang in there. I like how you're developing. You stick with the church, and that's great. May God bless you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Surely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.